The sun had barely risen over the rugged mountains, but the battlefield was already alive with chaos. Dust and smoke hung thick in the air, and the deafening sound of gunfire echoed through the valley. A team of Navy SEALs was trapped in the middle of this nightmare, pinned down by enemy forces who had surrounded them on all sides. Their mission, which had started with careful planning and precise execution, was quickly spiraling out of control. Each second that passed felt heavier than the last, and the soldiers could feel the weight of danger pressing down on them from all directions. These were the best of the best, trained to handle extreme situations, yet even they had never faced anything like this. Explosions shook the earth around them, sending rocks and debris flying through the air. Bullets whizzed past, striking trees, the ground, and occasionally hitting the soldiers' protective gear. Sweat mixed with dust on their faces, stinging their eyes, but they had no time to wipe it away. Every decision mattered. Every step could be their last. The enemy seemed to anticipate their moves, pushing them further into a corner, testing their courage and endurance. The team leader, a seasoned SEAL with years of experience, tried to maintain a calm voice over the radio as he assessed the situation. "We're outnumbered. Supplies are low. We need extraction now," he said, glancing at his team. Around him, his comrades were tense but determined. They had been through tough missions before, but this one felt different. The valley's narrow paths limited their movement, and the enemy had fortified positions that made every advance deadly. It was as if hope itself had been buried beneath the rocks and dust, leaving only fear and exhaustion behind. Despite their training, the soldiers could feel doubt creeping in. One by one, they checked their weapons and ammo, silently calculating how long they could hold out. Every soldier knew the risks. Every soldier knew the stakes. They had promised to protect each other, and failure was not an option, but the odds were frightening. The enemy forces were relentless, pushing forward with precision and coordination. There was no room to escape, no chance to retreat. Survival depended on ingenuity, skill, and a miracle that seemed almost impossible. As the situation worsened, the team exchanged quick, meaningful glances. Words were unnecessary. They understood each other perfectly. Each glance spoke of determination, fear, and an unspoken prayer for reinforcements. The radio crackled with static, making communication difficult. Every message that came through felt like a lifeline, yet it was fragile, unreliable. The soldiers clung to the hope that backup would arrive, that someone capable of turning the tide of this desperate battle would come for them. But as minutes dragged on, even the strongest among them felt the gnawing doubt that perhaps help would not come in time. Suddenly, the sharp sound of artillery in the distance reminded them that this was a battlefield, not a training ground. The enemy advanced with methodical precision, making it clear that they intended to overwhelm the SEALs completely. Explosions threw dirt into the air. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the taste of smoke filled their mouths. The soldiers ducked instinctively, returning fire whenever possible, but it was clear they were barely holding their ground. Time was running out, and the possibility of being overrun loomed like a shadow over their courage. In the midst of this chaos, the team leader scanned the valley for any advantage, any opening that could save them. His mind raced, considering every tactical possibility. Then he made a decision that could either save them or seal their fate. He radioed for air support. The words left his mouth with a mix of hope and desperation. "We need immediate extraction. Requesting air support now." He knew the dangers of relying on backup. Air support might be delayed or worse, unable to navigate the enemy defenses, but it was their only chance. The SEALs took a brief moment to regroup, catching their breath while keeping their eyes on the advancing enemy. Each soldier was aware that survival was no longer just about fighting skill. It was about trust, timing, and sheer luck. The thought of being rescued was like a fragile flame in the darkness, flickering but refusing to die. They had faced impossible odds before, but this mission pushed them to the edge, challenging every ounce of their courage and training. And so, they held their positions, hearts pounding, weapons ready, eyes scanning for any sign of hope. They were warriors trained to survive the unthinkable, yet the valley seemed determined to test their limits. The battle was far from over, and the outcome was uncertain. Every second felt like a lifetime, every heartbeat a silent prayer. Somewhere in the distance, a faint hope lingered. Someone capable of changing everything was on their way. For now, they could only wait, fight, and survive, clinging to the slim chance that the tide of this battle could yet turn. High above the rugged mountains, the roar of engines cut through the thin morning air. The A-10 Warthog, a powerful and battle-tested aircraft, soared with purpose, slicing through clouds like a predator hunting its prey. Inside the cockpit, the pilot, a woman who had spent years proving herself in a field dominated by men, gripped the controls with steady hands. Her eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the radar and the valley below, analyzing every possible angle of attack. This was not a training exercise. This was life or death. Every decision she made could save lives or cost them. The pilot had faced skepticism all her career. Many people doubted her skills simply because she was a woman in a role traditionally held by men. She had endured endless questions, sideways glances, and even outright ridicule, but she never let it break her. In the cockpit, none of that mattered. Here, skill, precision, and courage were the only currencies that counted. She had trained for countless hours, mastering the A-10's controls, learning every maneuver, and studying the tactics needed to strike with perfect accuracy. Today, all that preparation would be put to the ultimate test. The radio crackled, and the voice of the SEAL team leader came through. His tone was tense, urgent, but professional. "We are surrounded. Heavy enemy forces. Low on ammo. We need support immediately," he said. Every word weighed heavily in her mind. She knew that even the best-trained soldiers could be overwhelmed if they didn't receive help quickly. The situation below was desperate. The team was outnumbered, trapped, and running out of options. The pilot felt a chill of urgency. She couldn't fail them. She quickly mapped out the terrain. The valley was narrow, flanked by rocky cliffs that could easily hide enemy snipers and fortified positions. Every approach was dangerous, and one wrong move could put both her aircraft and the soldiers below in deadly risk. But she didn't hesitate. She had faced impossible odds before and thrived under pressure. Her training kicked in automatically as she formulated a plan to enter the valley, strike the enemy, and protect the SEALs while minimizing risk to herself and others. As the A-10 descended into the battlefield, the pilot's heart rate remained steady, though her mind raced with tactical calculations. She imagined the soldiers below, pinned down and exhausted, waiting desperately for a lifeline. Each one of them depended on her ability to act decisively. She could almost feel their fear and determination, and it drove her to focus even harder. The roar of the engines was almost like a battle hymn, a signal that help was on the way. The enemy forces were moving strategically, trying to corner the SEALs and prevent any rescue. She could see their positions clearly from above. Trenches dug into the mountainside, groups of soldiers advancing with precision, and armored vehicles cutting off potential escape routes. She tapped into every ounce of experience and instinct she had, knowing that her actions would determine the survival of everyone in that valley. Her hands moved effortlessly over the controls, adjusting speed, altitude, and targeting systems with practiced precision. As she approached, she began identifying priority targets, positions that, if neutralized, would give the SEALs the breathing room they desperately needed. Each decision required split-second judgment. Strike too early and the enemy might disperse. Strike too late and the SEALs could be overrun. She coordinated with her co-pilot and the weapon systems, lining up the first attack run with deadly accuracy. Explosions erupted in the distance as her weapons found their marks, sending enemy forces scrambling for cover. The soldiers below looked up, almost in disbelief, as the roar of the A-10 shook the ground and turned the tide in their favor. Even as she executed the attack, the pilot's mind remained sharp. She was aware that one mistake could be catastrophic, anti-air defenses were still active, and the terrain offered enemies hiding spots. She adjusted her maneuvers constantly, flying low enough to strike but high enough to avoid fire. Every move was calculated, precise, and necessary. Her training, her courage, and her determination were all coming together in this single moment, and the lives of the SEALs rested entirely on her skill. Between the intense focus and constant adjustments, the pilot also felt a surge of responsibility. She wasn't just flying an aircraft. She was the invisible hand that could turn despair into hope. The soldiers below, who had been on the brink of exhaustion and hopelessness, now had a chance to fight back. They didn't know her name. They didn't see the sweat on her forehead. But her presence alone changed everything. The enemy, previously relentless and confident, now hesitated as the A-10 unleashed its power with unerring precision. The roar of the aircraft echoed across the valley like a warning, a promise, and a lifeline all at once. From the cockpit, the pilot saw the SEALs begin to regroup, their morale lifted by the sudden and overwhelming support from above. She adjusted her attack runs, carefully targeting enemy strongholds while giving the soldiers space to move and fight. Each strike was timed to perfection, each maneuver executed with skill honed over years of experience. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. As the A-10 continued to dominate the battlefield, the pilot felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not from glory or recognition, but from knowing she was making a real difference. Below her, the soldiers' faces began to reflect hope, determination, and renewed courage. The impossible was becoming possible. Even in the midst of chaos, in the valley where hope had seemed lost, a single person's skill and courage had started to change everything. The valley had become a trap. Every direction the SEALs looked, they saw enemies advancing steadily, determined to crush them completely. Rocks exploded around them as mortar fire slammed into the earth, sending dust and debris into the air. The once clear sky was now filled with smoke, dust, and the smell of gunpowder. Each SEAL knew that their options were dwindling. Their ammunition was running low, their bodies were exhausted, and the constant pressure from the enemy had begun to weigh on their minds. The hope that had carried them this far was slipping like sand through their fingers. The narrow paths through the valley made every movement dangerous. There was no room to maneuver, no cover that could fully protect them. Even the trees and rocky outcrops that might have offered shelter were riddled with enemy snipers. Every step forward was a gamble. Every glance over the shoulder a reminder that death could be waiting in an instant. The SEALs were experts at survival, but this was different. The enemy had them surrounded, and their carefully planned tactics could no longer guarantee safety. Amid the chaos, the soldiers fought fiercely. They moved as one, covering each other's flanks, returning fire with precision and determination. Sweat ran down their faces, mixing with dirt and blood. Their muscles ached, but their training kept them moving, kept them focused on survival. They had faced impossible missions before, but this one seemed to push them beyond the limits of human endurance. Each second stretched into a lifetime as they ducked behind rocks, fired bursts of gunfire, and prayed that help would arrive. The team leader, aware of the growing danger, tried to keep morale up. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the noise of battle. "Hold your ground. We've trained for this. Stay sharp," he commanded. His words were more than instructions. They were a reminder of who they were and what they were capable of. But even as he spoke, he knew the situation was dire. Supplies were dwindling, enemy forces were overwhelming, and communication with headquarters was intermittent at best. Each message crackled through static, a fragile lifeline in the chaos. In the midst of this, a glimmer of hope appeared far above the battlefield. The SEALs heard the familiar, thunderous roar of an A-10 Warthog approaching. Their heads snapped up, squinting into the sky, unsure if their eyes were deceiving them. The sound was unmistakable, and suddenly, the impossible began to feel possible. The pilot, calm and precise, had identified their location and the positions of enemy forces. She had planned her approach carefully, knowing that any mistake could cost lives. From the air, the valley looked like a maze of danger. The enemy had fortified every strategic point, leaving little room for error. The pilot maneuvered the A-10 skillfully, weaving through anti-air defenses and natural obstacles. She targeted enemy positions with precision, each strike designed to give the SEALs a fighting chance. Explosions shook the ground below, scattering enemy forces and buying precious seconds for the soldiers to regroup. As the A-10 unleashed its power, the SEALs felt a surge of renewed energy. The enemy, previously relentless and confident, now faltered under the precise strikes from above. The soldiers adjusted their positions, moving with purpose, and fired with renewed accuracy. For the first time in what felt like hours, they had a chance to breathe, to plan, to fight back rather than simply survive. The presence of the aircraft was a turning point, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, help could arrive. The enemy quickly realized that they were under threat from above. Their coordinated advance began to falter, confusion spreading among their ranks. The SEALs seized the opportunity, launching counterattacks with renewed vigor. Every maneuver, every shot was calculated to maximize their chances of survival. The valley, once a prison, was slowly becoming a battlefield they could influence rather than a trap designed to destroy them. But even as they fought back, danger remained. The enemy was desperate, willing to take risks that could harm both themselves and the soldiers. Mortar fire continued, bullets still zipped past, and the ground shook with every explosion. The SEALs knew that their lives were still hanging by a thread, that victory was far from certain. Yet, with the A-10 above them, they had a reason to hope. They had a reason to believe that survival, even against overwhelming odds, was possible. As the pilot made her precise runs, the SEALs began to understand the scale of her skill and bravery. From their perspective, she was almost like a force of nature, invisible yet incredibly powerful, changing the course of the battle with each strike. They had been on the brink of despair, but now, with every explosion and maneuver, the impossible started to shift. What had seemed like certain defeat was slowly turning into a fight they could win. Amid the smoke and noise, the SEALs fought with renewed determination, inspired by the presence of the A-10. They realized that survival wasn't just about holding their ground. It was about trust, teamwork, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The valley that had trapped them now became a stage for their resilience and skill, amplified by the precise intervention of the pilot above. The impossible had not disappeared, but it had been challenged, and for the first time the soldiers could see a path forward. Every second was still a test of endurance, every decision a gamble. But the SEALs, exhausted yet unbroken, now held a new weapon in their hearts: hope. With the A-10 above them, fear began to give way to determination, and despair slowly gave way to courage. The battle was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn, and the soldiers felt, for the first time in hours, that they might just make it out alive. The roar of the A-10 Warthog grew louder as it swooped low over the rugged valley, its engines like thunder rolling across the mountains. From the ground, the SEALs looked up, barely able to believe their eyes. The aircraft wasn't just flying above them. It was entering the heart of the battlefield, and with it came a glimmer of hope they hadn't felt in hours. Dust and smoke swirled around them as the pilot skillfully navigated through the chaos. Her eyes locked on the enemy positions below. Every movement she made was deliberate, calculated, precise. She wasn't here to intimidate. She was here to change the course of the battle. The enemy forces, confident and relentless just moments ago, suddenly faltered. They had been advancing steadily, believing that the SEALs were trapped and hopeless. But the sight of the A-10 tearing through the sky, weapons systems primed and ready, shook them. They scrambled to adjust, to take cover, to counter the threat from above. But it was too late. The pilot had already begun her first attack run, and her precision was flawless. Rockets and munitions found their targets with terrifying accuracy, striking enemy fortifications and armored vehicles while leaving the SEALs' positions untouched. The SEALs couldn't help but feel awe as they watched the pilot at work. She moved through the sky with confidence and calm that seemed almost supernatural. Every twist, every dive, every release of firepower was a demonstration of skill honed over years of training and countless missions. From the ground, it looked like she was dancing with the battlefield itself, and the enemy, no matter how well prepared, was powerless to stop her. Her presence alone was changing the dynamic of the fight, giving the SEALs the breathing room they desperately needed. As the A-10 continued its attack runs, the valley seemed to shake with every strike. Enemy soldiers fled from fortified positions, armored vehicles were disabled, and the carefully coordinated advance of the opposition began to collapse. The SEALs seized the moment, moving from cover to cover with renewed energy, firing with precision at enemies who were disoriented and forced into retreat. For the first time, it felt like they were not just surviving, they were fighting back. But the pilot's job was far from easy. The valley was narrow and treacherous, filled with natural obstacles and enemy fire. Anti-aircraft weapons threatened her from multiple directions, and one miscalculation could be catastrophic. Yet, she remained focused, calmly adjusting her altitude, angle, and speed to avoid danger while keeping her attacks deadly effective. Every movement was measured, every decision instantaneous yet flawless. Her years of training and experience were paying off in the most critical way possible, saving lives. Below, the SEALs were not just witnessing skill, they were witnessing bravery. The pilot's courage in flying low over such a dangerous battlefield, risking her own life to protect theirs, gave them a renewed sense of determination. They realized that they weren't alone. There was someone up there who understood the stakes, who had the skill and courage to intervene, and who refused to let them fall. Each attack run was a signal, a message. Hold on. You're not defeated yet. As the A-10 made multiple passes over the valley, the pilot began coordinating her attacks to create maximum impact. Enemy forces that had once moved confidently now scattered in confusion. Trenches that had seemed impenetrable were destroyed, and groups of soldiers that had surrounded the SEALs were pushed back. From their positions, the SEALs began to recognize a shift in momentum. For the first time since the battle began, the enemy was reacting to them rather than the other way around. The impossible situation that had seemed hopeless now felt manageable. The pilot's precision wasn't just technical, it was strategic. She knew that the SEALs needed breathing space to regroup, to reload, to counterattack. Her strikes were timed perfectly, each one designed to weaken the enemy while giving the soldiers below an advantage. Explosions rocked the valley, and smoke rose in thick clouds, obscuring enemy movements and creating opportunities for the SEALs to maneuver. Slowly but surely, she was changing the battlefield, turning chaos into a tactical advantage. The SEALs moved with renewed confidence, inspired by the presence of the A-10 above. Every strike they saw, every enemy position neutralized, filled them with hope. They understood that survival wasn't just about individual skill. It was about teamwork, trust, and the courage to act under pressure. The pilot's actions were a reminder that even in the most desperate moments, a single person's skill and bravery could change everything. As the day wore on, the valley remained a dangerous place, but the SEALs' outlook had shifted. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by determination. They now had a force above them, precise and unstoppable, giving them the chance to fight back. The pilot continued to weave through the battlefield, her focus unwavering, her skill unmatched. From the ground, it felt like a force of nature had entered the fight, and for the SEALs, that force was the difference between life and death. By the end of the sequence, the tide of battle had begun to turn. Enemy forces were disoriented, their confidence shattered. The SEALs had gained momentum, moving with renewed purpose, ready to reclaim control of their position. The pilot's presence above had transformed the impossible into something achievable. Every explosion, every maneuver, every precise strike was proof that courage, skill, and determination could overcome even the darkest moments. In the valley where hope had seemed lost, the roar of the A-10 had returned life to the battle, and the SEALs felt, for the first time in hours, that victory was within reach. The valley that had once seemed like a prison now began to change. With the A-10 roaring above, precision strikes destroying enemy positions, the SEALs felt a new surge of energy and determination. The fear that had gripped them for hours started to fade, replaced by focus and resolve. They knew that their chance to fight back had finally arrived, and they moved with renewed purpose, covering each other's movements and targeting the enemy with deadly accuracy. Every soldier knew their lives depended on timing, coordination, and courage. The SEALs had trained for countless scenarios, but this was the most intense test of all. They moved carefully, using rocks, trenches and debris for cover, advancing strategically as the enemy struggled to regroup under the relentless strikes from above. Each explosion from the A-10 was a signal for the SEALs to push forward, reclaiming the ground that had seemed impossible to hold just hours earlier. The pilot, high above the valley, adjusted her tactics with precision. She wasn't just dropping munitions randomly. Each strike was carefully planned to weaken the enemy while protecting the SEALs. She coordinated with the soldiers over the radio, marking targets, guiding their movements, and ensuring that every attack was effective. Her presence was not just physical. It was strategic, turning what had been a hopeless situation into a coordinated counterattack. The enemy, previously confident and relentless, now appeared disorganized. Their attempts to advance were met with the deadly accuracy of the A-10's firepower and the precise maneuvers of the SEALs below. Armored vehicles were disabled, fortified positions destroyed, and enemy soldiers forced to retreat into scattered groups. The chaos that had once threatened to overwhelm the SEALs now worked in their favor, creating openings for them to strike with skill and precision. The SEALs pressed forward, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Every step, every shot was measured and purposeful. They communicated silently with hand signals and quick glances, understanding each other perfectly. For hours they had fought to survive. Now they were fighting to win. Their confidence returned, fueled not only by the effectiveness of the A-10 but also by the realization that they were no longer outmatched. They were turning the tables on an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. The pilot made multiple attack runs, weaving through the sky with remarkable skill. From the ground, it looked like a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. She targeted key enemy positions, machine gun nests, sniper towers, and armored vehicles, while keeping the soldiers below safe. Every strike she made allowed the SEALs to advance, reclaiming lost ground and disrupting the enemy's control over the valley. Her precision and courage inspired the soldiers, giving them the belief that survival was not just possible but achievable. As the SEALs moved forward, they began to encounter small groups of enemy fighters attempting to regroup and mount counterattacks. Each skirmish was tense and dangerous, but with the A-10 above providing constant support, the soldiers could engage the enemy with confidence. Rockets and gunfire from the aircraft broke enemy lines, allowing the SEALs to neutralize threats methodically. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival was transforming into a coordinated offensive. The tide of battle continued to shift. Enemy morale, once high, was crumbling. Soldiers who had been fearless now hesitated, confused by the sudden precision and power striking from above. Panic spread through their ranks, and their once organized formations fell apart. The SEALs exploited this confusion, striking swiftly and decisively, reclaiming key positions and gaining momentum. It was as if the battlefield itself had changed sides, responding to the skill, courage, and determination of the SEALs and their unseen ally above. Every soldier felt the impact of the pilot's actions deeply. They realized that the A-10 was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of hope and determination. Her presence reminded them that courage, skill, and teamwork could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. Each explosion from above was a heartbeat of reassurance. Each precise strike a promise that they could survive and prevail. Slowly but surely, the impossible was becoming achievable. By mid-afternoon, the SEALs had reclaimed much of the territory they had lost. Enemy forces were scattered, demoralized, and struggling to mount any coordinated resistance. The valley, which had once been a trap, now became a stage for their resilience, skill, and determination. The soldiers fought with renewed focus, each move calculated, each shot precise. Every step forward was a victory. Every enemy position neutralized a confirmation that they were no longer merely surviving, they were winning. The pilot continued her support, undeterred by fatigue or danger. Her skillful maneuvers kept enemy forces off balance, allowing the SEALs to press the advantage. From above, she could see the progress they were making, the confidence returning to their eyes, the courage replacing fear. She had become the invisible hand that guided them through the chaos, the difference between despair and hope, between survival and victory. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, The valley that had once seemed hopeless was now a battlefield transformed. The SEALs were no longer trapped. They were in control. Momentum was on their side, and the enemy, once dominant, was now struggling to survive. The combined force of the soldiers' skill and the pilot's precision had turned the tide. What had begun as a desperate struggle for life had evolved into a coordinated victory against overwhelming odds. In that moment, every soldier understood something profound. Courage, teamwork, and determination could change the course of even the darkest battle. And high above them, the pilot continued to roar across the valley, a symbol of hope, precision, and relentless skill. Together, they were unstoppable. High above the valley, as the A-10 continued its relentless attacks, the pilot's hands moved with a calm precision that seemed almost effortless. Yet, behind that calm exterior, there was a story few knew. Every second she spent controlling the aircraft, guiding explosions to exact targets, and saving lives was built on years of relentless training, personal sacrifice, and the constant pressure of proving herself in a field dominated by men. She had not earned her place here by luck. Every maneuver, every decision was the result of decades of effort, grit, and determination. From a young age, she had known that the path she wanted was not going to be easy. When she first decided to become a military pilot, friends and family had warned her that it would be grueling, demanding, and often unrewarding. She had faced endless skepticism, instructors questioning her abilities, peers doubting her endurance, and a culture that often underestimated her simply because of her gender. Every day of her training was a battle against these doubts, not just from others but also the insecurities she felt within herself. Yet she pressed forward, determined to earn respect not through words but through action. She remembered the long nights spent studying flight manuals, memorizing every detail of the A-10 systems, practicing maneuvers until her body ached, and running simulations that pushed her to her limits. She had endured physical exhaustion, mental stress, and countless moments where she wanted to give up. But she didn't. She pushed past the fear, the doubt, and the fatigue, reminding herself that her goal was larger than herself. It was about mastering the skills necessary to protect lives, to be ready for the moment when someone's life would depend on her precision and courage. That moment had arrived today. Looking down at the valley, she saw the SEALs pinned under overwhelming enemy fire, their situation desperate, their hope fragile. Every decision she made in the next few minutes could determine who lived and who died. Her fingers flew over the controls, releasing munitions with surgical accuracy, adjusting altitude and speed to avoid anti-aircraft fire, and maneuvering in ways that only someone with extraordinary skill could manage. The years of training, the endless drills, and the moments of doubt that she had conquered all came together in a single, decisive performance. The pilot's mind wasn't just focused on tactics. It was also filled with a deep sense of responsibility. She knew that the SEALs had pinned their trust in her, that they were counting on her to tip the scales in a battle that seemed impossible. The thought of their lives, of the families they would return to if she succeeded, weighed heavily on her. Yet it was not a burden that paralyzed her. It was fuel. It was the reason she could remain calm in the chaos, make split-second decisions, and act with flawless precision. Every life she could save was a victory she could not afford to fail at. As the A-10 dove again, targeting an enemy position that had been threatening the SEALs, her training revealed itself in the smallest details. She adjusted for wind, for terrain, for the movement of enemy forces below. Each shot was carefully calculated, each pass deliberate, and yet, she did it all instinctively, as though the aircraft was an extension of her own body. In moments like these, experience and intuition merge, and she became more than a pilot. She became a guardian, a force of protection for those fighting for their lives below. Despite the chaos, she also carried a quiet humility. Recognition, accolades, or praise had never motivated her. What mattered was the mission, the people she protected, and the discipline she maintained under pressure. She thought of the times she had faced ridicule for her choices, for her ambition, and she felt a sense of quiet vindication. Here, in the heat of battle, skill and courage spoke louder than prejudice ever could. The judgment of others was irrelevant when lives hung in the balance and every decision had immediate, tangible consequences. As she executed another run over the valley, she felt a sense of connection with the seals she had never known. They did not know her name, nor did they need to. They trusted her presence, her precision, and her courage. And in turn, she felt a bond with them, a shared understanding that they were all part of the same mission, united in purpose despite being separated by hundreds of feet of sky and earth. Their struggle, their courage, and their resilience gave her focus, reminding her that every ounce of effort she had put into becoming a pilot was worth it, that every challenge she had faced had prepared her for this exact moment. Even as the enemy forces tried to regroup and retaliate, she remained unwavering. Her personal history, the sacrifices, the doubts, the countless hours of training, manifested in every calculated dive, every precision strike, and every maneuver that kept the SEALs safe. She had earned her place here through perseverance and discipline, and now, she was proving it in real time under fire. As the battle raged below, the SEALs slowly began to reclaim ground, inspired by the invisible hand that guided their safety from above. They moved with renewed purpose, each success feeding into the next, each strike weakening the enemy and strengthening their resolve. And through it all, the pilot above continued her deadly dance with the battlefield, skillful, focused, and resolute. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a symbol of hope, courage, and unyielding determination. In that moment, the human side of heroism was clear. Skill alone was not enough, and courage alone was not enough. It was the combination of preparation, sacrifice, determination, and focus that made the impossible achievable. And high above the valley, as explosions shook the earth and smoke filled the sky, the pilot embodied all of these qualities, turning fear into hope and despair into possibility. The valley that had once seemed like a trap was finally beginning to feel like a place the SEALs could control. The enemy forces, who had advanced confidently just hours earlier, were now scattered and disoriented. The explosions and precision strikes from the A-10 had broken their formations, destroyed their fortifications, and shattered their morale. Slowly, the SEALs began to push forward, reclaiming ground that had seemed impossible to hold. Each step they took was a small victory. Each enemy position they neutralized a proof that survival and success were within their grasp. The soldiers moved with careful precision, their movements coordinated as though they were part of a single organism. They had fought side by side through exhaustion, fear, and danger, and now that training, experience, and instinct were paying off. They advanced cautiously, using cover effectively, communicating silently through hand signals and subtle gestures. Every step was deliberate. Every shot was carefully aimed. The battlefield was still dangerous, but the balance of power had begun to shift. The impossible was no longer inevitable. Victory was starting to feel possible. From above, the A-10 continued to dominate the battlefield. The pilot, calm and focused, executed each maneuver with flawless precision, coordinating with the SEALs below. Her attacks were no longer just defensive. They were tactical strikes that allowed the soldiers to take the fight to the enemy. Mortars and rockets exploded in strategic points, armored vehicles were disabled, and enemy fighters were pushed into retreat. The pilot's skill turned chaos into opportunity, giving the SEALs the ability to act rather than merely survive. The SEALs began to feel the tide of the battle shift beneath their feet. Confidence returned to their eyes, determination replaced fear, and courage surged through their veins. They moved with renewed energy, taking positions that had previously been impossible to secure. The enemy, once relentless and confident, now hesitated and faltered under the coordinated pressure from the air above and the soldiers on the ground. Every action the SEALs took was amplified by the pilot's support, turning their bravery into effective strategy. One by one, the enemy positions that had seemed untouchable fell. Machine gun nests were silenced, sniper positions eliminated, and fortified trenches destroyed. Each success allowed the SEALs to advance further, reclaiming the terrain they had lost and weakening the enemy's control over the valley. Explosions rocked the ground, sending dust and debris into the air, but the soldiers moved through the chaos with purpose. The impossible situation that had once seemed like certain defeat was being transformed into a coordinated victory. The pilot, high above, kept adjusting her tactics with careful calculation. She knew that the soldiers needed breathing space to advance, to reload, and to strike effectively. Every pass she made over the battlefield was designed to maximize the impact of her strikes while minimizing risk to the SEALs. Her precision allowed the soldiers to take advantage of the confusion she created among the enemy ranks. Slowly but surely, the momentum of the battle had shifted entirely. As the SEALs pressed forward, small groups of enemy fighters attempted desperate counterattacks. But each time, the A-10 was there, striking with perfect accuracy, dismantling their efforts before they could gain any ground. The soldiers, inspired by the constant support above, met each threat with courage and skill. The partnership between the air support and the ground team became seamless, each relying on the other to achieve the impossible. They moved as one force, unstoppable, relentless, and determined. Hours of fear, uncertainty, and struggle were beginning to pay off. The SEALs had regained control of key positions, forced the enemy into retreat, and minimized their own casualties thanks to the precise intervention of the pilot. The once helpless team was now leading the fight, reclaiming territory that had seemed lost forever. The battlefield that had held them captive was now a stage for their resilience, courage, and determination, amplified by the unmatched skill of their ally in the sky. Every soldier felt a mixture of relief, pride, and awe. They had faced impossible odds, been surrounded, and felt hope slipping away. And yet, through discipline, courage, and trust in each other, and in the pilot above, they had overcome the overwhelming enemy force. Each victory, each enemy position reclaimed, was a testament to their skill, perseverance, and determination to survive. The impossible had not only been challenged, it had been overcome. The pilot continued to watch over the valley, vigilant and precise, ensuring that no enemy forces could regroup or counterattack. Her presence remained a symbol of hope, a constant reminder that courage, skill, and determination could change the outcome of even the most desperate situations. From the ground, the SEALs knew that their survival, their victories, and their progress were in large part thanks to her relentless focus and unwavering skill. By the time the battle finally subsided, the SEALs had reclaimed control of the valley. The enemy, demoralized and defeated, had fled or been neutralized. Silence settled over the battlefield, broken only by the distant echo of the A-10's engines as the pilot maintained surveillance. The soldiers looked at one another, exhausted but triumphant, silently acknowledging the incredible force that had saved them. The impossible mission that had begun in fear and chaos had ended in hard-won victory, thanks to the combined courage, skill, and determination of those fighting on the ground and the unseen guardian above. In that moment, every soldier understood the meaning of trust, teamwork, and bravery. They had faced death, doubt, and despair, and together, they had turned it into survival and triumph. And high above them, the pilot, quiet and focused, had made it all possible. The battle had finally ended. The valley, which had been a chaotic battlefield of smoke, fire, and fear, was now quiet. Dust and debris still hung in the air, mingling with the fading smell of gunpowder. The SEALs, exhausted but alive, slowly lowered their weapons, their muscles trembling from hours of tension and combat. They looked around at the valley they had fought so hard to reclaim, a place that had seemed impossible to survive, now conquered through sheer determination, skill, and teamwork. The sense of relief was almost overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a quiet reverence for what had just happened. The soldiers' eyes turned upward instinctively, searching the sky for the A-10 Warthog that had thundered above them, striking with deadly precision and keeping them safe. For hours, the pilot had been their invisible guardian, guiding them through a seemingly hopeless battle. Now, as the aircraft circled overhead, it felt almost symbolic, an unspoken acknowledgement that her skill, courage, and focus had been the difference between survival and disaster. The SEALs silently recognized that, without her, many of them might not have made it out alive. Exhaustion did not diminish their awe. The soldiers had been tested to their limits, fighting not only the enemy but also fatigue, fear, and the weight of uncertainty. Every minute of the battle had demanded their full attention, yet they had persisted, relying on training, instinct, and the support from above. And now, with the enemy defeated or in retreat, they had time to reflect on what they had accomplished. The impossible task of holding the valley, trapped and outnumbered, had become a victory they could scarcely believe. The pilot, high above, continued her patrol, though her heart had shifted from the heat of combat to quiet reflection. She had executed every maneuver with precision, taken every calculated risk, and remained calm under pressure, yet she didn't seek recognition. The focus had always been on the mission and on protecting lives. Her thoughts briefly drifted to the SEALs below. Their courage, determination, and unwavering trust in one another had been inspiring. Each decision she made had been driven by the knowledge that these soldiers depended on her, and that sense of responsibility had been the driving force of her actions. As the soldiers regrouped, they began to treat the aftermath of the battle with methodical care. Wounded comrades were tended to, ammunition was accounted for, and the positions they had fought so hard to reclaim were secured. There was no room for arrogance or celebration yet. The battlefield demanded focus even in its relative silence. But quietly, in glances exchanged between the men, there was pride, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond survival. They had been tested in the crucible of combat, and they had emerged victorious. The SEALs spoke briefly over their radios, coordinating extraction and ensuring that no pockets of enemy resistance remained. And in that brief lull, one of them finally spoke words that had been unspoken in the heat of battle. "We didn't make it alone." Eyes shifted upward to the sky, where the roar of the A-10 still echoed faintly. Even without ever meeting the pilot face to face, the soldiers felt an immense gratitude and respect for her unwavering courage. She had not only provided air support, she had delivered hope, precision, and strategy when it was needed most. The pilot, aware that the battle had been won, finally allowed herself a moment of relief. She had faced danger, risked her life repeatedly, and executed maneuvers that would test even the most seasoned aviators. And yet, the mission's success was the only acknowledgement she sought. There was a quiet pride in knowing that skill, preparation, and courage had converged to save lives and turn an impossible scenario into a triumph. Recognition from others would be secondary. What mattered was that she had done what was required when it counted the most. As the valley began to settle, the SEALs gathered in small groups, sharing quiet words, checking on each other, and reflecting on the ordeal they had endured. The terror, the chaos, and the fear that had gripped them for so long had given way to a profound respect for each other, for the training that had prepared them, and for the invisible force that had safeguarded them from above. Every soldier silently acknowledged that victory had not been achieved by skill alone, but by teamwork, trust, and the courage to persevere even when hope seemed lost. In those quiet moments, the pilot's presence felt almost symbolic, a reminder that heroes often work unseen, that courage does not always seek applause, and that the difference between despair and triumph can rest in the hands of a single, determined individual. The SEALs, exhausted yet alive, had been given a second chance, and that chance had been delivered through skill, focus, and unyielding bravery. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, the soldiers finally allowed themselves to relax, though their vigilance never completely faded. They had survived, they had fought, and they had triumphed against overwhelming odds. And somewhere high above, the pilot continued to watch over the battlefield, a quiet guardian who had turned hope into action, fear into courage, and despair into victory. In the aftermath, the SEALs knew that they would never forget this day, nor the person who had made their survival possible. They had faced death, uncertainty, and impossible odds, and together they had prevailed. And for the pilot, the mission was a confirmation of everything she had worked for. Preparation, skill, perseverance, and courage could change lives, shape outcomes, and turn the impossible into reality. The battle was over, but the story of courage, resilience, and skill would live on in memory, in respect, and in the understanding that even in the darkest moments, Heroes could rise and make all the difference.